And just waiting for that to kick in. So thanks a million for joining today, and looking forward to getting stuck into a really interesting topic, which is PlayDecide, a patient safety tool. It's a tool being used and developed by UCD for discussing patient safety and error reporting. So I'm really delighted to introduce today, we have Steve and we have Karen, both who are part of the UCD Health Systems team. They both have been involved in the development and the dissemination of the patient safety game. So Steve, if you'd like to add anything else about your background.
Sure. So I'm actually a relatively new addition to the health systems team at UCD, previously having worked in the laboratory setting as a researcher on tuberculosis, and then furthermore working in the NGO space for the past 5 years as well. So my experience is quite diverse by background, so I'm not always a specialist, but I'm always keen to add my sort of input into new research and become part of a good team such as the UCD.
Great. Okay, and we're really lucky to have Karen with us as well. She's a patient representative who works with the UCD team, but she also works across a number of different education programs, delivering lectures from a patient perspective. So if you have anything else to add, Karen, for our listeners?
No, if Steve considers himself not to be an expert, I'm not quite sure what realm that puts me in. Very much a newbie in all of this sphere, but delighted to offer my voice, I suppose, as a patient, whenever I get the opportunity to be involved in any of these innovations, particularly in the area of patient safety improvement and quality improvement in the health systems area. Yep, so that's
we might move in nice and close to the mic here whenever we're speaking. We've just got a little bit of feedback there. Okay, so just lastly, before I hand over to our two speakers, we wanted to be as interactive as possible. So at the top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a little icon saying chat, and you can click on that and then type in any questions or comments or queries that you have, and we can deal with those as we go along or at the end. Also, we are active on Twitter, so if you have anything that you want to ask or comment on or share from the webinar, happy to do that through at QI Talk Time, and the telephone number and the event number is there. So without further ado, I'll hand over and we can get going on the content. Okay.
So earlier on, we were having a little bit of a discussion over who should sit closest to the camera, and I, of course, voted for Karen. So we're both moving closer to be closer to the microphone. Please, if you have any problems hearing us, then we're happy to sort of we can go over things again. Just put it into the chat, and we'll respond as quickly as we can. Also, if you have any questions, please also put it into the chat while we go. Hopefully we'll be able to sort of interleave some of the audience's questions as we go through the slides. And obviously at the end we'll have a full discussion as well. So thanks very much, Roisin, for that great introduction. As everybody knows, this is Karen, I'm Steve. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so discussing partly about the background of PlayDecide patient safety, and then also some of the information about how the game itself, the tool itself, actually works. And when we describe it, we often say, okay, PlayDecide patient safety is a serious game learning tool to discuss medical professionalism in relation to patient safety. But sometimes that actually does it a little bit of an injustice, because there's a lot of interesting components to it. And I think for anybody who's working within the area of quality improvement and patient safety, as well as people who are working at the clinical interface, there's a lot in it which can be useful, not only for themselves, but also in promoting discussions with colleagues. And now, with the latest revision, it is much more relevant to multidisciplinary teams than the earlier iteration. I'm just going to advance the slide now. So obviously, I think everybody's got a reasonably shared understanding of what is, a safety culture in the healthcare setting. And obviously, to the layperson, that almost always suggests things like patient safety. And we know that we always try and uphold the best standards of practice when it comes to ensuring that patients receive the best outcomes when they come into care. But in addition, there's the angle that staff also need to not only participate in the safety culture, but also be the beneficiaries of it too. So part of the work of the health systems team, and also of the way that the PlayDecide patient safety has been developed, has been in ensuring that there's good and equal participation by the different staff cadres gaining understanding of safety culture. So currently, there's a number of challenges that are faced in terms of trying to put together supportive working environments around safety for patients and staff. And obviously, one of the big headlines that pops up are things like a blame culture. You know, I went into healthcare, I had a bad outcome, I want to know whose fault it was. And often it's like, well, I want them to be in trouble, or these things aren't necessarily that common, but they are factors that may influence the building of safety cultures and cause problems when we're trying to establish good systems that allow people to benefit from those. But there's a lot of other challenges as well that aren't maybe necessarily due to individuals. They're not always an individual's fault. I think it's quite safe to say that 99.999% of people who are working within the health services, they almost always have the patient's best interest at heart. You know, a lot of times when errors are occurring, they may be due to things like systems factors, configuration of resources that then impact on the ability to deliver the best possible care. But then we have the interface with professionalism as well. So people who are working in the systems, they always want to uphold the standards of not only themselves as individuals working as professionals, but also with organizations who provide guidance around how to put in and how to deliver professionalism and best practice of care. Sorry, advancing the slide again. Obviously, we're currently operating in an environment where things exist like open disclosure, mandatory open disclosure. Often these things are implemented very much in a top-down manner. So guidelines are released and they have to be implemented by organizations who then provide guidance to their staff over how to make them happen on a pragmatic level. But sometimes there is a little bit of an interplay, and it can be hard for individuals who may not necessarily know all of the ins and outs of the patient safety bill, for example, to implement it fully, to implement the guidelines fully. It's also worth noting, I think, Karen, you definitely subscribe to this view as well. Patient-related incidents, sometimes you can't avoid them, but I'm not talking about from a sense of avoidable harm, of course. Like those are things that can be controlled for separately. But when you have a system which is configured in the way that our health service is, there are many, many moving parts, and sometimes the reality on the ground is that it can be very challenging to avoid some types of problems. We'll kind of elaborate a little bit more on that later, but when we look at data which is coming, for example, from the state claims agency, there's a lot of information about the types of errors that are occurring, and from learning from that, we can go forth and we can track these and we can try and put in solutions to avoid them. There may also be a little bit of underreporting of errors. So the great work done by our colleagues at RCSI in the Irish National Adverse Events Study, it indicated that there may be something of a discrepancy between the amount of incidents which are actually occurring and also the level of reporting. So obviously, there's many, many reasons why people don't report errors. And the biggest issue that you might sometimes see is just the fear of retribution. It's not only in terms of the individual versus the patient. There's also problems which can occur within, say, the hierarchical settings, within institutions or within teams. I'd say this isn't happening all the time, but it's not an unreasonable thing to fear, particularly if we have a situations where someone might observe a colleague who is working in a manner which may not be standard, but it may still be practical. But how do we manage the ways in which they interact around that, and how do they communicate those? If they feel like someone is genuinely operating in an unsafe manner, but they may be a very senior colleague, how do they navigate the systems to report those kind of cases without worrying or fearing for example, repercussions on their career? So there's a lot of levels to that particular interaction. There may also be the case that people believe that someone else is already dealing with the problem. So a piece of equipment may be not functioning. There may be a sign on that equipment saying, this piece of equipment is not working, don't use it. So naturally, we tend to assume that somebody knows about it and somebody is working to correct it, but that may not always be the case either. Then there's also an angle of, well, what if reporting is futile? So in some cases, depending on the systems which are in place to conduct error reporting, is it a paper-based system or an electronic system? Can people report errors and receive feedback in a timely manner? If they're even an acknowledgement that their reports have been received and are making the information is making its way to the correct people. And I think a lot of organizations have excellent systems in place. So I don't know how common that particular scenario is, but it may be an influencer on the level to which people are reporting. And so I guess as a means of supporting not only good error reporting, but also best practice as an element of professionalism as it relates to patient safety, the health systems team at UCD developed the PlayDecide patient safety tool. So I'm going to advance once more. So the tool itself, allows members of multidisciplinary teams to enter into open discussions around patient safety in a very structured manner. They can exchange the perspectives from their own cadre, and they can also work towards agreeing a joint group position around error reporting and patient safety. They may not always agree fully, but as a group they can discuss and they can vote on positions that they feel best suit the ethos of their teams when it comes to error reporting. So you've probably seen already that PlayDecide patient safety is a serious game, and obviously a serious game is one wherein the chief outcome is an educational focus rather than strictly entertainment. Like I mentioned previously, it is discussion-based, and it provides a means of teams to get together to undertake interdisciplinary learning. Provenance-wise, it comes from an initiative by InfoTude and the European Network of Science Centres and Museums, and it was created as a tool to let diverse groups of individuals work together, discuss using facts-based discussions around a variety of topics. So for anybody who's interested in that background, you can visit playdecide.eu and you're able to actually look at not only the different adaptations that people have made of PlayDecide, but also some of the results of past game sessions. And they cover a huge spectrum of topics, including, for example, the political side, humanities, arts. There's a lot of information there, all hanging around the core structure of PlayDecide as a game. So PlayDecide patient safety tool has been created as the outcome of a co-development process, which involved a number of different and diverse partners, including academic institutions, health institutions, government organizations as well, and of course, crucially, patient involvement too. And so it's at this point where I will stop boring the audience, and I will allow Karen to make, I'm going to say nothing, much better than what I could do.
Oh, fantastic job on outlining PlayDecide. I became involved with the health systems team at UCD by means of an invitation to input into the development, the co-development of a version of PlayDecide to address the issues of error reporting in the area of patient safety, see if we could make any impact, any positive impact in that area. So the co-design process was a very interesting one to be involved in, and as a patient, I felt the patient voice was respected, it was valued, and it was a very collaborative process. Back in 2015, when we started this as a steering group, we sat around a table. There were 11 stakeholders sitting around the table representing people who work within the health system, those who are using the health system, and indeed those who are developing and improving quality within the health system. And that was the key part, was that all voices were represented and respected and valued. As part of that process, we started with familiarizing ourselves with PlayDecide. So as Steve said, it exists as a format on playdecide.eu. It's a means of reaching a consensus on contentious issues for all intents and purposes. Where you've got a disparate set of opinions at the table, this is a means by which you can use discussion to reach a point where you're happy with a particular position or either a prescribed position or one that the groups themselves feel that they can stand over and support. So we started by, as I said, familiarizing ourselves with the structure of the game. We moved on to defining what the scope and content of the game should be for our purposes. And that was basically to imbue a sense of medical professionalism in the area of patient safety. So I'm encouraging junior doctors at the time, in the first iteration of the game, our brief was in the realm of junior doctors speaking up about safety issues and effective reporting in that area. So that's what our brief was, and that's what our scope was initially. We developed the content, and the content is key. The game itself, it consists of a series of cards. The key cards in the game are the story cards. And therein is the heart of this entire initiative, really, because what the story cards do is they reflect the humanity behind the medical systems engagements that happen on a daily basis. So the things that we see reported and where data is extremely important and data gathering is extremely important, it's difficult to respond or ameliorate your behavior in any meaningful way based on a spreadsheet. So really what the story cards do is serve to humanize these engagements. So they are real-life perspectives, real-life vignettes and narratives, and told from the perspective of all the different players, if you like, within our health system. So we had the perspectives of patients represented, we had the doctors, the nurses, and various levels within the health systems. We had them represented in the story cards, and players are invited to read through them and respond to them in a more humane way, I suppose, than just responding to figures on a page. So what the story cards, as I say, they reflect the humanity behind it. What we did was we developed the content, put the story cards together. We had them, then we had them externally reviewed to make sure that we were staying on course, that this made sense to others looking in, and that we were sticking to our brief. And we got very positive feedback from the external reviews. We had a very good look at them internally as well, and decided that we were happy with the set of story cards we had come up with. So then we tested the game and we evaluated the game once we had put the story cards together. Other cards involved are issue cards and the information cards. Issue cards, well, we'll start with the information cards. The information cards are the scientific data, the up-to-date scientific information relating to some of the stories and incidents that might be reflected in the story cards. Issue cards probably represent issues that arise in that realm. So not just the information involved, but some of the challenges and some of the impediments that people encounter whenever they're trying to be effective in their day-to-day work. Challenge cards are used really just to stimulate the discussion if it's starting to stall a little bit at the session. And then we've got white cards, which are effectively just a blank page to allow people to put their own opinions or their own stories as they arise during the discussion. So at the end of the game, what happens is, I suppose, people are asked to agree on a position statement. And for the purpose of the game, we devised 4 position statements, so 4 prescribed position statements. But as I say, people were invited then to come up with their own if they weren't happy to support any of the 4 that were offered. It was tricky actually coming up with the 4 position statements, because I think Steve referenced earlier, I mean, everybody in this sphere has patient safety at the very heart of what they do every day. This is why we're here. It's to improve the lives of people. It's to make sure that people stay safe. So to come up with position statements that would be realistic, and normally you come up with quite conflicting statements for the purposes of PlayDecide. For us, we came up with a continuum of views, ranging from a utopian view that all staff should report all issues of patient safety and that learning should happen. And that ranges from that first statement to the very last one, in which it basically says that staff cannot be expected to report safety concerns because they are too busy doing their day-to-day work. Now, I suppose it's not surprising that when we have played the game, the vast majority almost exclusively go for the very first position statement, and where we we understand that that's a utopian view. I mean, I think that speaks to what's at the heart of what people do every day. This is what they would like to see happen. And it's what happens to stop them effectively reporting and allowing learning to happen and moving from, as Steve said, that culture of blame to a culture of learning. And PlayDecide is very much a tool geared towards the discussion and geared towards moving from that area of blame to learning. It's a safe space. That's what PlayDecide session, PlayDecide is. It's a safe space in which to discuss issues which happen every day of the week, and where we would like to think they don't happen, and possibly statistics, reported statistics, would show a certain glimpse of the picture of what's happening every day. It's not showing the full story. And definitely in our evaluation of playing the game, we saw that time and again. What would be said during sessions and post-session would be that they invariably they weren't aware that it was their job to report it. They felt that somebody else was reporting it. In fact, it was more fundamental than that. Oftentimes they weren't aware that situations they were encountering were actually issues of patient safety or issues that would impact on patient safety. So the discussions that happen around the session of PlayDecide, they drill down into those day-to-day engagements, which oftentimes get missed and glossed over and do not get reported. Interestingly, some of the research initially showed that 85% of the reporting that happens is actually it's reported by nurses. And unfortunately, we're only seeing about 3% of medical professionals actually taking part in the reporting process. And it really does come down to that they don't see their own individual role in that reporting structure. And unfortunately, it's that individual role that then feeds into the system-wide improvement. So it's the key part is to fundamentally acknowledge everybody's individual role in the area of patient error reporting. So when we tested the game, we took it to hospital sites and we investigated whether it would be a useful tool, whether it would be in addition to support medical professionalism, and it was found that it absolutely was. The feedback has been very, very positive, and one of the key aspects of it is the buy-in and the commitment from senior management or consultants whenever it comes to facilitating sessions with this. We find the more committed leadership are in using tools, education tools such as this, and the more the staff and the medical professionals underneath them buy into it and see their own role in it. That's a key part of it, I think, is that support for those who find themselves in situations where reporting could be an issue. It's that second victim almost, and that issue of are we supporting those who are in a position to report these issues? Reporting these issues leads to learning. Learning leads to systems improvement. So we have found it an extremely efficacious way of improving effective reporting. So we move on to the session outline. As I just said there, it takes roughly an hour, under an hour to play. We adapted the game slightly, shortened it ever so slightly. It was originally 80 minutes. We've brought it down to just under the hour so that it can be done in a protected time during lunch or whatever. Group sizes, anything from 4 to 8 with a facilitator. The facilitator's role is really just to do that, just to facilitate. It's not to drive the discussion in any particular direction. Our role is not to inform policy or to lay down diktats. What it is just to facilitate discussion. And the facilitator's role is merely that, and to make sure that people feel safe and feel supported to discuss the issues that arise during the session. So the first phase of the game, they are asked to select a story card, to select issue cards and information cards, possibly clustered around particular themes, to then discuss things that arise from the information gathering session, and then at the end of the session to formulate a group response in response to what has arisen during the session. The information gathering stage, it's a very interesting one. they read through the vignettes, they read through the narratives in front of them, and they summarize it for the group. And we're off, really, is what happens, because you see yourself in these scenarios. And if not yourself, and if you're at the start of your career and haven't yet encountered situations like this, it is an undoubted situation. You will at some point encounter some of the situations that occur on the cards. So that's the information gathering stage. The information cards, the issue cards are discussed and shared, and as I say, clustered around themes where it's appropriate. Then we move on to discussing what has come up, the issues that come up, and it's a very rich discussion that happens. It's important to say it's not recorded, so there are no sanctions for anything that is discussed at that session. But it is a very valuable exercise. It does allow that opportunity for reflection and consideration of your own role within the system, within your day-to-day working environment, and the issues and stories that are reflected in the game are seen time and again, day after day within the system. So this is an excellent opportunity to discuss it. The last challenge cards are just if things stall, as I am at the moment, and we've got a challenge card, just to stimulate the discussion a little bit. And it poses the odd question every now and again, throws a little curveball in, allows people to maybe think outside the box a little bit. The yellow card, I've never had to use a yellow card, thankfully, at a session, but I mean, they're there if things start to steer off course, or if people are getting a little boisterous, which hasn't happened, as I said. There's been robust discussions, but no boisterousness yet. So they just get held up just to call people back into line, I suppose. So that's the discussion phase, and as I say, there's a wealth of information that comes out of those that discussion phase, and people realize that their colleagues are facing the same challenges as they are every day, and this is an opportunity to talk that through. And the final phase of the game is the group response formulation. So as I've gone through before, the position statements are laid out in the game, but they are welcome to draft their own policy or their own position statements if they're not happy to fully get behind any of the four that are prescribed. And that's the only part of it that is, I suppose, kept as a record, that would be how groups responded in terms of the position statement. And the discussion that happens, as I say, is entirely confidential, and there are no sanctions attached. This is merely a means of educating and informing, letting them know what the reporting structure is within their own work environment and their role within it. So that's pretty much as I can think of to say just now. Is to hand back over to Steve again. Apologies for waffling.
Thanks very much, Karen.
I'm thinking just from a practical perspective, a few things, just if people don't mind me butting in. Just to elaborate a little bit more on the facilitator's role, can anyone facilitate, or does it have to be somebody with particular skills?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Yeah.
By all means, they can contact us if they'd like some guidelines in terms of facilitating a session. But really and truly, the facilitator's role is merely to ensure that the phases of the game are moving along in a timely fashion, and to stimulate discussion if it stalls, using the challenge cards, etc. But that is the facilitator's role. There are no key skills involved in facilitating a session, and anybody, and they could be drawn from any aspect of the health system. Really, I mean, we're actually keen to move away from it always coming from the quality and safety department, and possibly look for want of a better word, champions outside of that area, because I think people, they commit more to it if it's somebody from within their own realm, or within their own work environment, and responds better.
I'm just wondering as well, this might be a bit off the wall, but can people actually come up with their own stories? So say,
absolutely,
can they create their own that they can use that maybe are more relevant to them? Absolutely,
and the white card will allow for that. So they can jot down if something springs to mind that if something's been sparked by one of the other stories, and they can think of something specific to their own situation. Yes, they can jot down on a white card and share that with the group. I should say that we moved on from the junior doctor iteration of the game in response to some of the dissemination we did across hospital sites nationally. and we spoke to quality and safety departments and to risk managers, and the response was invariably positive. But what they did suggest is that we look at a multidisciplinary version. So we moved on to the second iteration of the game, and we drew from a multidisciplinary perspective to devise a new version of the game. And maybe Steve, you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I think this is really relevant to a couple of the questions which came in on the chat box there, which was, is it customizable? And Karen, you really answered that. And is it aimed solely at doctors? And the earlier iteration, it probably was mostly just due to the way that the tool was put together. But now, as Karen was saying, during the reiteration process, we reached out to a number of stakeholders for contributions. So again, we developed the new story cards based on absolutely real-world scenarios, things that are completely grounded in reality. And now the current version of the game has representation from GP, nursing, most like it's one, pharmacy, physiotherapy, more patient stories, and now it also includes the management perspective as well. So I think it's safe to say that we have a good coverage of the different cadres who are involved in making patient safety happen, not only from the clinical side, but also from the other parts of the system. I think there's probably always room to include more. And I think with respect to the customization option, that's a good place to put that in there too. We also, I think Karen said this already, but we also included updates to the information and issue cards as well to reflect things that have been happening quite recently. For example, during this year, things like patient safety bill 2018 and the cervical check situation, which both present very highly complex scenarios. So we hope to have incorporated some of the angles from those situations as well.
In fact, we've taken a couple of stories and told them from different perspectives, which was an interesting exercise, because obviously there's just more than one side to any story.
I think that definitely, that's definitely representative of probably some of the discussions that will be had in workshop sessions that involve multidisciplinary teams. There's different perspectives around why and when and who does our reporting. To give an example, one of the scenarios which we saw was that there was a busy clinic which was requiring more administrative support for letters to be typed and sent out to patients' GPs. Some of the people who were working in the clinic felt that there wasn't enough support, and it was very clear cut. They just had to add in more support for that. The management perspective was different again, because they reached out and requested information on the actual incidents that were occurring. Yet there was also an argument about, well, actually, this is just wasting our time. We told you what we want. Just give us this. Mm-hmm. But obviously, being able to understand each other's perspectives is a key part of being able to work together to do so with improvement. One of the questions.
Here's about the medication incident stories. So,
go ahead.
I think Karen, you're going to say the same thing. Yes, there are kind of. I think it's one or two. There may be only one, but yes, to do with the medication, for example, medication errors. But I think it's the strength of the game that actually sometimes the stories that they have are a little bit more. They're more nuanced and they're more complex than just a medication error. There's the circumstances that surrounded that error, which actually are even more important than the error itself, and they will enable the team to. I think the way that they're written, everybody can understand the core issue. And I think you don't have to. Karen always made a great point. You don't have to show them what it was, to tell them what it was. We show them, show them the situation. They'll be able to extract that information very easily, and that helps them formulate a good discussion around that. And sorry, just advancing the slide. So obviously, we spoke previously about the benefits of running workshops with PlayDecide. And I don't know about Karen. Karen, I don't know about your own take, but for me, I think one of the best things that it does is really focuses that sharing of information and learning between the different cadres who are working in the team. Karen, what would be your take on?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's quite a unique tool in that it does offer those different perspectives and that understanding of standing back, taking that moment to stand back and see something from somebody else's perspective. Because we do get very caught up in crisis management, particularly in an environment like health systems, and it just becomes firefighting exercise. And to have that moment to step back and look at things from a different perspective is vital. And particularly when you get caught into your own specific speciality or your own area of expertise, it is so important to stand back from that and see, well, how does this situation pan out from somebody else's perspective, and what is my role within this? How can I improve the outcomes here for patients and for patient safety? Yeah.
And I think another thing to throw in here, maybe on its surface it looks as though the game, it may turn out a little bit complex, or if you were coming to it for the first time, it might be hard to sort of wrap your head around, well, how would a session flow. But all of that is included with full instructions within the game itself. It's available as a PDF, so anybody can download it and begin using it.
And support available if you require it.
Absolutely.
If you'd like us to pop down and have a chat with how a session should work, and hopefully I would explain it a little better than I've done today. And yep, that's available as well. We can certainly do that.
We definitely encourage anybody who's interested, even if you're just interested in finding out a little bit more or to share with colleagues. We created the website patientsafetydiscussions.ie. It houses all of the content which relates to PlayDecide patient safety. This includes things like, obviously, the revised MDP edition of the game. That's available just as a PDF download. There's also a policy brief on medical professionalism in relation to patient safety that was developed during the co-development process. And for anybody who may want to, say, bring this to colleagues or bring this to management to say, hey, can we begin using this tool? There's a promotional video. It's 5 minutes long. It gives the complete lowdown on the game itself and the benefits. So it's well worth, sharing that with colleagues as well to put the message out there. And so we hope that that all of our colleagues working in all branches of health systems and services will please do take a look, because it's all there. It's all free. And if anybody is, thinking of hosting, or if they host a session, it would be great if they would maybe contact us at the health systems team, because we're always interested in getting some feedback on, well, if you ran a session, what did you find that worked? Did you get bogged down anywhere? Was it totally unfit for its purpose? Which we hope is not the case.
Yes, obviously with the second iteration of the game, it shows a willingness on our part to evolve. So, I mean, if you did spot some issues that you felt could have been addressed in a little better fashion or whatever, you can make suggestions to us. I should also say that where we've been focusing primarily on the acute end of things up to now, it is with this new multidisciplinary version of the game, it's very well suited to being played in the community. So I would encourage anybody across the system. It's not just for acute. It's not just for hospital settings.
I know this is a little bit sort of too social media-y, but if anybody is conducting sessions and if you have consent from your participants, please take a couple of pictures and tweet them to us as well at UCB Health Systems. I mean, it would be really great to have the communities and the health systems workers' perspectives out there too.
Yeah, that's great, Steve, because I know a lot of people that actually join into QI Talk Time use this as a forum to meet in their local institutions or hospitals or community health organisations to come together around the area of quality improvement. So this could be an hour-long session where they just come together and try it out. And certainly if they contact health systems at ucd.ie, if they need any advice or assistance, they can certainly do that. To be honest, the chat box has been quiet. I think we've covered all the questions that have come in through that. I suppose one thing that struck me throughout the discussion there was the involvement of patients in the actual game. So can a group of people bring in a patient rep into the discussion, or is it purely just for staff?
At the moment, it's geared towards staff, but do
you think there would be a benefit, or?
I don't see a reason why a patient rep couldn't be involved in it.
So the purpose of it is
the purpose
to encourage health professionals.
Exactly. It would be, the patient doesn't have a role per se in the systems reporting end of things. It is definitely something to consider, and maybe that's a complaint procedure piece of work that would need to be done. But I wouldn't see why they couldn't be involved, but I would struggle slightly to see the benefit to the patient.
Yeah, they would be doing a favor to the team, I guess, if they were coming in. But I think it could also be very beneficial because it adds that the human side as well.
Sure.
We have the case stories, and they're presented in a fashion where you can really understand the perspectives of the patient themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Having that representation would help.
Absolutely. I would say this was against the grain slightly, being a patient voice at the table, but I mean, in terms of being a safe space for those working within the system, I think there would be a lot more openness possibly, and that sounds almost counterintuitive to me.
Yeah.
But I could see the position of those working within the system, that they would feel more open to discussing their challenges.
I suppose one of the main purposes of the game is to encourage
Yeah.
that. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one other question around, can sites use this for action planning? So,
And I would say that in itself, it's just one component. So I think it probably could be integrated into that process. I think it could be quite a useful sort of tool to help focus and bring forward discussions in that area. Obviously, it wouldn't be the only thing that should be used, but yeah, I think it could be a nice addition.
Yeah, and one thing that did pop up time and again, as I said, the junior doctors in particular were very unfamiliar with the reporting system. And that was one thing that really did strike us, that induction doesn't appear to be the most effective time to give them this type of information, and that a revision at some point included into some toolbox further down the line and revise the whole, how do we effective report, what is the importance of effective reporting. To revisit that at some point is a really important thing, I think, really, because it's simply missing it. It's a very busy time at induction, and it seems to be getting lost in the swamp there somewhere, and it would be no harm to revisit, because it's a very good way of just touching back again.
I think, sorry to interrupt, I think that adds into, there has been some evidence previously with colleagues who have contacted the health systems team. There is a difference sometimes between the rates at which the different cadres report incidents. And part of that is also a reflection on the way that they've been trained around incident reporting. And I think that one of the benefits of having a session of PlayDecide with a multidisciplinary team is that the different cadres can actually share, their experiences of, well, I was trained in patient safety and incident reporting as a one-off during the first week of the job, whereas others may be receiving a refresher training, or they may have structures that support those systems. I think by learning what's happening in other people's workbenches, I think that's probably quite a good benefit of the game itself.
And it's a less pressurized based environment. Absolutely. Whereas sometimes it can come as quite a stressful topic.
Yeah.
So this creates that space, I suppose, for people to learn and discuss openly with people that they work with as well, I think, which is really key. Well, unless I don't think there's any more questions. I think you've been so clear on everything. So thank you so much to Karen and Steve for their time today. Thank you so much for sharing all of that great information. This webinar will be available, both the side set and also the recording will be up on QI Talk Time on qualityimprovement.ie. There's also the knowledge and skills guides and loads of other resources there on that website. Also, you'll find some of the other work of quality improvement that they're doing, for example, around medication safety, which is one of the, I suppose, high error reporting topics that exist within acute hospitals especially. So thanks again to you both, and hopefully we might have you back again to tell us about the next iteration. So our next webinar is on Tuesday the 11th of December, and again this is going to share a guide that the HSC have developed called the QA and I tool. Declan O'Keefe from the Acute Hospital Division will be running that webinar, so hopefully you can join in then. So that's another tool that teams can possibly start to try out and use. So thanks again, and that will be our last webinar before Christmas, so hopefully you can join in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.